want to thank you for joining us today uh, for our program, Librarians as Key Players in Publishing. We're so happy you're here with us. Before we begin, I have a few items to share. First, I am Christine Brown, Outreach Services Librarian for the South Central Regional Library Council. I use pronouns she and her. SCRLC is one of the 9 multi-type library systems comprising the Empire State Library Network in New York State. And we cover 14 counties, 10,045 square miles, and our headquarters are in Ithaca, New York, which is in Tompkins County. A few other items. If you have not found it already, the closed captioning is available, and you can find that down at the bottom if you want to use that. Today we are using webinar and not meeting, which means participants do not have access to the microphone. But you do have access to chat. So if you have questions, you can enter them there and we'll share them as we have time. Throughout the presentation, if you want to make sure that everybody in the chat sees your questions and comments, make sure you select everyone in the drop-down menu. We are recording this webinar, and it will be shared with all registrants along with information about how to request a certificate of attendance. And a link to an evaluation form will pop up as you leave the presentation. We ask that you complete the evaluation so that we can use the information to guide us with future presentations. We also ask that you follow SCRLC's Code of Conduct. A link will be added to the chat shortly. Cliff Note version is to be kind, be courteous, be respectful, and we hope that you'll be totally engaged. And now I am going to introduce our presenter, Mickey Smith. She earned a Master of Library Science from the School of Library and Information Sciences at the University of Iowa in 2007, and a PhD in Library and Information Science from the iSchool at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in 2017. She started as the medical librarian at Guthrie, based in Sayre, PA in 2021, and helped integrate a second library into the Guthrie system with the acquisition of Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital in Binghamton, New York by Guthrie in 2024. She has been acting as the managing editor of the Guthrie Clinic Journal of Medicine since 2022 and is currently supervisor and system library services at Guthrie. And now you can take it away, Mickey.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. And I'm so happy to be here. And I want to thank SCRLC for hosting the Lunch and Learn and for inviting me to speak. As Christine said, I'm Mickey Smith, and I am at Guthrie, which is located both in New York and Pennsylvania. I am usually on the Pennsylvania side at Robert Cagir Hospital, which is sort of our the largest of the 2 teaching hospitals in the system. We have 12 residency and fellowship programs at Robert Cagir Hospital, and then as Christine mentioned, we have Lourdes now in Binghamton, New York, and my colleague Danny Scopoletti is here. He is the Lourdes librarian who splits his time between Lourdes and Robert Cagir, because Lourdes is also a teaching hospital, but it has 3 residency programs, so it's a little bit smaller in terms of the demand. So we sort of triage the services centrally, and we serve the whole system. So that's 6 hospitals, and I don't know at this point how many clinics. I think it's close to 60 throughout New York and Pennsylvania in our service areas. So As Christine said, I started at Guthrie in November 2021, and this talk kind of intertwines the library history and the journal history in ways that hopefully will become clear as we unfold. But when I started, the library at Robert Packer Hospital, because we didn't have wards yet, had been closed since March of 2020. It was sort of a pandemic casualty, and so it was unstaffed as of March 2020. So it had been about 18 months by the time I started in November 2021. So I was tasked with restarting the library at Robert Packer Hospital and sort of getting it on a firm footing because our GME programs had expanded over the recent years, and our fellowship programs have expanded since I've been there. So it was imperative that we kind of get things up and running. And so I was pretty busy in those early years building out a digital infrastructure for the library to be able to serve the system, which was very helpful when Lords came on board. So that was, but the library prior to 2020 had an impressive history spanning about 9 decades. So the library was founded in 1929 when 1 year after Dr. Donald Guthrie of the Guthrie Clinic founded the clinic in 1928. So the library was one of the first pieces, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the journal was founded in 1931. So these histories are very intertwined. The funny thing for me is that I knew about one of Guthrie's librarians before I'd ever heard of Guthrie or lived in New York or thought about becoming a medical librarian. I had read a paper and then sort of looked through a dissertation on the same topic by the same author about Jean Antes, who was a medical librarian at Robert Packer Hospital for the Guthrie Clinic. And so I knew about her and the Circuit Rider Librarian Program, and I thought, wow, that's so cool. But I didn't remember where she was from, or I didn't know because I'm not from here, and I had no idea. So when I was doing the interview, it clicked that when I was preparing for the interview, it clicked that this was Jean Antes' library. And I realized I had a total library nerd, fangirl moment of like, oh, wow, that's really cool. Like she was an awesome medical librarian, and the circuit program was really awesome. I don't have time to talk very much about it today, but just you can look it up, look her up, and you can read about the circuit librarian program. You can also read about it in the archives of the Guthrie Journal Clinic of Medicine, because there are multiple articles published in that journal about the circuit rider program from the 70s when she was writing reports about the program. But anyway, so I keep a library card, like a borrower's card with Jean Ante's signature on it on my desk in front of me to this day, so that I can remember whose shoulders I'm standing on and keep myself kind of grounded and my expectations high for myself. But anyway, I won't bore you with more of my history, except to say, that I found that I took it as a sign somehow that I knew about Gene Antes, and coming into the interview, it made me feel really excited about the prospect of working in that library and hopefully reconnecting the current library with that long tradition of hospital librarianship. So what does any of this have to do with the journal? Whoops, I clicked the wrong thing. All right, hopefully my slide's going to advance right now. There we go. So um, uh, it turns out that Jean Antes was not only a medical librarian rock star, but she was also the managing editor of the journal, which I mentioned published continuously under different titles from 1931 to 2003. But she wasn't the first medical librarian at Guthrie to manage the journal. I was totally surprised and delighted when I was started working on the journal to discover that actually the first editor of the journal was the first librarian at Guthrie, Mabel Grant, from 1931 to 1952. So Donald Guthrie appointed her as both medical librarian and as the editor of the journal. And then when she retired, the librarian after her took over, Barbara Cowles, until 1957. So the library, then the journal passed out of the library's hands for a while. It went to a statistician over in the research foundation, and then drifted back when Jean Antes sort of hung up her hat for medical librarianship, and then put on her editor's cap for a while. But there's just a very long tradition at Guthrie of the librarian and the library playing a critical role in the journal's publication. And so when we relaunched in 2021, which I'll talk about, here I was, right? And the only thing I will say about myself that's funny too, besides the Jean Antes, like knowing who that was, totally coincidentally, was that I did have scholarly publishing experience, because before I started working in libraries in 2002, I had worked at the University of Chicago Press in the journals division as a senior production controller for 5 scientific journals, for a group of 5 scientific journals. So I kind of had a pretty good idea of what it took and what was involved, from editors, printers, all the moving parts. We don't have printers now because we're online only, but copy editing, electronic publication, which at the time you have print and electronic, and so on and so forth. So I was like, okay, I can do this the peer review process, working with the authors, and getting the files, processed, and all of that stuff. So it came in very handy. Um, so, as I mentioned, the journal had a 20-year hiatus. It stopped publication in 2003. There was kind of a realignment of priorities and health system. These things happen. I don't know how many medical librarians I have. I'd love to see where people are from, and what kind of library you're in, if you're in a library, or if not, what pulled you here today. If you want to put it in the chat, I can see it. But anyway, the journal ceased publication in 2003, but everything old is new again, sort of. When the library closed in 2020, in March 2020, next door, the building next door, literally, which is the Donald Guthrie Foundation building, the executive director there, Burt Cagir, he's a colorectal surgeon. He's been at Guthrie for more than 20 years. He was formerly the program director of the general surgery residency, before he became the executive director of the foundation, which is sort of there to support education and research at Guthrie. But he was over there scheming to figure out what it would take to restart the Guthrie Journal, because it was still functioning when he got there, and then it closed shortly thereafter. But like many longtime Guthrie physicians, he really missed it. Like he thought it was a really great thing that Guthrie had, and that its absence was felt. And he thought it would be wonderful to be able to bring it back. And so that's what he worked on as a pandemic project, sort of. And he launched the journal right before I started. The first issue came out right before I started. So I was a little late to the game. I missed a lot of the preliminary conversations, but it was in my job description to help with the journal. And then in 2022, like Christine said, I formally became the managing editor, and kind of took it on as part of my job responsibility. But the journal now is very different from the journal then, in the sense that it is peer reviewed, and it is fully open access. And we're diamond open access, which means we don't charge. We don't charge submission fees, and we don't charge article processing charges. And though we're institutionally based, our goal is to be a multi-institutional publication. Anybody can publish, anybody can submit. We use double anonymous peer review, and so on. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's a change, because in the prior decades, most of the articles, not all, most were written by Guthrie authors, Guthrie physicians, Guthrie residents, Guthrie fellows, Guthrie nurses, our Guthrie librarian, who was also the editor. There was a lot of, it was mostly an internal publication, but then as people would come visit the campus in Sayre, sometimes they would agree to have their presentations published in the journal, and so on and so forth. But for the most part, it was an internal publication. So new iteration is a fully open journal. And we hope to get to a point where we're, 50-50, 60-40, Guthrie and non-Guthrie authors. So, and that's part of the reason we kind of changed our name and 2024. I'll talk a little bit more about that too, because it is a tough landscape in which to launch a journal, especially when you're a tiny little fish in a great big sea. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. Sorry, my little button seems to be delayed. There we go. So why tell this story to this audience? I don't know. I'm hoping, I think like 20, a couple dozen of you are here. So something appealed. But I think the story does have something to appeal, for almost everyone. Medical health sciences librarians, especially the hospital librarians who are wearing a lot of hats, scholarly communication librarians or librarians who, again, wearing a lot of hats, one of which is support for scholarly communication, library staff who are interested in digitization projects, medical and or library history nerds. I tick both of those boxes, or people who like to root for the underdog. And that's, I had to put that in here because when I get to the end of this thing, you'll see some of what makes us an underdog. And not just us, but all sort of smaller journals that are, institutionally or society journals, institutionally based or society journals. It's tough, or we're not aligned with one of the major, for-profit publishers. Our publisher is University of Toronto Press. Long history, 125 years, I think, but they have a small medical journal portfolio, and they're not, a big player in medical publishing. So it's tough. It's tough, and so we're an underdog in that way, but persistent. So I would say, we're one of hundreds on any given day, thousands of medical journals out there competing for readers, competing for authors, competing for peer reviewers. If you support scholarly communication in any discipline, I'm sure you know about the peer review crisis as the number of journals has exploded with open access. The number of peer reviewers has not exploded. In fact, academia is shrinking in many ways and depending on the field. And so, it's very hard to find people, multiple people, at least two people for each article, for each manuscript who have the appropriate expertise, who are available and willing to review. And I know that the people I invite, often I'm sure I am one of 8 invitations they have received in any given week. And they're going to go with the journals they know, and they're going to politely decline the Guthrie Journal, the Guthrie Clinic Journal of Medicine, and that's okay. We keep going, and we do find people. It's just it does add some time to our ability. It takes us longer to turn around manuscripts because we're committed to quality peer review, but we are also existing in the peer review crisis. So that's one of the reasons we're an underdog. Um, and especially when we're out there with journals, like we're at one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end, you have sort of mega journals, journals that follow the mega journal model, like some of the MDPI journals or Curious. If you're a medical librarian, you know about Curious, and you may also know it was delisted by Web of Science in 2025, or this year actually, or Helion. These journals can publish just a single journal, like Curious itself, or one of the MDPI mega journals, can publish more than 10,000 articles in a year. A journal, like, and like they just churn out like thousands of articles in a year, and they turn them around very quickly, which is why they're starting to get some backlash from some of the indexing bodies, because there's a question about the quality of peer review and editorial oversight when you're publishing that volume of articles in the context of a peer review crisis. It's like, where are they coming from and how are they so fast? So anyway, they are at another end of the spectrum. And so we see this as a strength, though, in a way. We're not about quantity and speed. We are really slow and steady. We're committed to quality through, careful peer review. But we're still 4 years in and trying to build our audience, reach our audience with this model, amidst all the noise out there. But we do have two things going for us. One, again, is we don't charge anything, which is really important in a time of tightening budgets, especially now that institutions have cottoned on to the fact that the money shifted from the subscription model, like the library subscriptions, to article processing charges, which may come off a different line or out of a different fund or whatever. That hidden cost is sort of becoming apparent now. So they're tightening, funding, but the APCs keep going up, APC's article processing charges. And it's really tight. It's really difficult for authors to get that institutional support for their publications. And I know our authors, we're competing for even our own Guthrie, residents, fellows, and faculty to publish in our journal because they have other places, they can publish too. But sometimes it does come down to available funding and, what do you want? And I think our articles are, I'll show you later, are discoverable, even though we are not yet indexed. But also we have librarians. And if there's one thing librarians are really good at, it is outreach, because we are literally trained in it. You know, and I think that I've been able to bring some of that to the journal in terms of trying to connect with people and build an audience. So we're working with the slow, steady approach, and we're confident we're going to get there. We're stable right now. We're just still trying to grow, and I'll come back to that later. So first, I want to give you a little bit of the highlights of the history. I can't spend all my time talking about the history, but I can give you a little bit of history. So I mentioned, Mabel Grant came on. She was the first librarian, 1929. When she retired in 1952, Dr. Guthrie dedicated a whole volume of the journal to her. I mean, a whole issue, I'm sorry, of the journal, volume 22, number 2, was dedicated to Mabel Grant, the librarian and editor of the journal. And he wrote an appreciation in the journal for her in that issue. And I love to use the quote on the slide because I think, hospital libraries in particular, especially since we've been kind of written out of all the accrediting bodies as an essential thing, we're not viewed as essential because we're not in listed as essential anywhere. So we have to prove our worth at every turn. But I think we're particularly vulnerable to, a loss of institutional kind of history and knowledge and about the role that we play. And so I love to bring out this quote whenever I can from Donald Guthrie. But he talks about, how when he was designing the clinic building, which is adjacent to Robert Pecker Hospital, if you've been there, but he left a space unassigned and didn't tell anyone what it was for. And he said, "I was dreaming of a library, but lest my dreams not eventuate, thought it best not to declare myself." The space was still unassigned when the building opened, so he went to find a librarian who could, quote, "spin the web of my dreams into reality." And he did in Mabel Grant. He hired Mabel Grant. She was not a professionally trained librarian, but she had been working as a librarian for someone, and that person, I believe, passed on, and he knew of her, and so it was sort of snatched her up. And she built the library that he called the research center of the hospital, where staff could, and this is a quote, "prepare papers, review new treatments and operative techniques, pursue graduate studies, prepare for specialty board examinations, and obtain any type of assistance involving medical literature." And that sounds very similar to what we do in our 2 libraries at Guthrie today, where we support patient care, education, and research all day, every day. So I do like to bring that out a little bit to show that the library was always sort of part of the vision for the clinic. Let's see. And then this is a little bit on the origin of the journal, which again, 1931. So we're in like a 3-year window when these things kind of take off, and it's all part of Donald Guthrie's kind of vision for what is the Guthrie Clinic. And so we had residents at that time since the 1920s who rotated from UPenn in surgery, and so they would work with Dr. Guthrie. And so one of these residents, Hugh Robertson, pitched the idea of a journal to Guthrie in 1930, and Donald Guthrie approved. And so partly because each intern, resident, and fellow was expected to present at least 1 paper per year as part of their training, and so many of them then would publish those in the bulletin. So it became a place where residents could learn, the ropes, as it were, and have their work published and seen. That was a very different time, 1930. There weren't a lot of medical journals that you could get published in, especially, it took a lot of work and there weren't as many opportunities and there wasn't, it was, rejection rates were higher. There weren't as many people trying, honestly. It was a very different world. Um, but Dr. Guthrie, again, in that appreciation says the journal went from circulation in 1931 to a few friends and associates to circulation to over 100 research centers, as well as hundreds of individual physicians and surgeons. Its distribution in America has spread from coast to coast, and it has wide circulation abroad. Now, in these decades, the journal wasn't peer reviewed, and it was never indexed in Medline. Although there are sometimes when a journal goes defunct, as ours did in 2003, Medline will index some historically significant articles they consider to be of enduring value or historical significance. And so some of the articles from the previous iterations of the journal are indexed, but the journal itself, as a journal, was never a Medline journal. Um, but I think you can see that it played a central role in graduate medical education and continuing medical education at Guthrie, and to some extent throughout the region, certainly, and beyond. Small potatoes compared to other journals, but we played an important part. Um, so, where am I? So I did want to say there was a letter also that's on the slide here. Our friend Hugh Robertson wrote this letter to the journal in 1978. So, like, let's see, he was in 1930. It's like 48 years later, almost 50 years later, and make sure the history knows he talked Donald Guthrie into this. Venture and sold him on it, which I really enjoyed. They published this letter in the journal in 1978 that he was writing to the printer of the journal, reminiscing about how exciting it was. And you can see on the slide the title page for the first volume of the journal with a little line drawing of the entryway, um, and so on. Okay, so now. Um, So in the current issue of the journal, we're honoring one of our former editors as an editor emeritus. He's still involved with the journal. We re-invited him to participate. He's retired now, but he wrote this lovely memory of his time as an editor. He was the editor for 14 years. He's was a radiologist, Dr. Sayre, and he reports that during his tenure, the journal had a circulation of over 1,000. He established an editorial board and a national advisory editorial board for the journal, and so was trying to, and they changed the name in 1985 to the Guthrie Journal because they were trying to, I think, establish it as a journal that could be peer reviewed and launched as, what we're trying to do now, the 1985-90 version of what we're doing now. And so was kind of setting it up, I think, to be perhaps launch itself beyond the Guthrie and the region, and to become a fully, operational, peer-reviewed scholarly journal. But he writes about the importance of it, and he also says Gene Antes was his right hand during this time. But he says, we reported our clinical outcomes, compared them with best practices, reported the dramatic advances being made with open heart surgery, which were initially based on Dr. Sewell's open heart bypass coronary artery surgery. Dr. Sewell was at Guthrie for a brief time. We included advances in trauma therapy with the advent of medical helicopter evac services. I do not recall ever being refused by a chief of a section or a chair of a department to incentivize colleagues to provide journal articles. So I include this just to say, like, I hope you get a sense of like the energy around the journal and the role that it played in the culture of the institution for those decades. I mean, I think it was a really cohesive thing. It held people together. It held the physicians together. It was interdisciplinary. It sort of gave them opportunities for teaching and learning, because that's something Guthrie does very well is graduate medical education. And we're a clinical campus for the Geisinger. Robert Packer is a clinical campus for the Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine. So we're into medical education there fully, and we have our nurse residency programs as well. But anyway, so I feel like it was a real, you get a sense of like the way the journal and the library, I would say by extension, were really core to the culture of continuous learning at Guthrie. And I don't have time really to run you through more history, but I do want to say, because I want to get to the present, but I do want to say you can explore the full archive from 1931 to 2003, and then, of course, 2021 to the present on the website. And it's really worth doing because I think one of the things that was so exciting about, I mean, there's launching the journal, which is a whole thing in and of itself, but the fact that we were able to wrap the digitization piece into our agreement with University of Toronto Press, what just absolutely thrilled us to no end, because to us that was so important because we think that the journal, whatever it was, it wasn't, it really, as a historical sort of document now, it really represents like 70 years of rural health delivery, like rural health provision in Pennsylvania and New York. It, talks about these clinical outcomes. It's got some case reports that are, still for things that are still rare and still have enduring value, the thing that case reports are supposed to be, right? Like rare, conditions or innovative, treatments or whatever. Like some of these are still enduring and are now more discoverable, but there's a lot too of the history of just sort of, well, the circuit rider program, for instance, is documented in there, but also, some of the ups and downs and changes with medical education and the way that it is organized and accreditation happens also impacted the system. And so you can kind of see some of that reflected in the articles in the journal. So anyway, I think it's a really brings a lot of value now that it is freely available to everyone. And I will say just briefly about the digitization piece, one of the struggles is that it's a destructive process to digitize at the cost within our budget. It was a destructive process. So we only had one complete set of the journal at Guthrie, and we were not going to destroy it for digitization, which meant that the whole digitization hinged on being able to find another library in the country willing and able to donate a complete set or to Frankenstein complete sets together from multiple libraries. So I was Nancy Drew for a few months, like calling, scouring library collections and calling libraries like, this is a weird question, but hey, it looks like you might have, these volumes of the Guthrie Journal taking up shelf space in your, storage annex. Like, would you be willing to donate those to us so that we can destroy them to digitize them and we will make them freely available, to everyone on the other end. And Mayo was willing to do that for us. They had a complete set and they shipped it to us. And we, noted that in our on our website, but the archive is available now and was digitized because they were willing to free up, 6 linear feet of shelf space or something to give us those 73 volumes of the journal for digitization. So we still have our one complete print volume at Robert Packer in my office actually, and then we have the digitized version. And there are still some issues with it, especially like with some metadata things, and I think there might be a couple of things missing. So we're still, it's a lot to go through, but it's been up since we signed the agreement with them a few months after, so 2023. So I encourage you to look through it and see, what you can see there, because that's my medical history, library history nerd piece. But I think it's really I'm really excited that we were able to do that and that UTP was able to help us realize that and that Mayo was able to like I was glad I was a librarian and I just knew who to call. I was calling other librarians and, understood probably they'd be happy to give up the shelf space, especially if it was going to be open access. But I just had to find those complete sets and it took a while, but we did it. So, okay. Um, but this is also related to the digitization piece. So this slide that you're looking at now is the most read articles from July 2024 to June 2025, which is our fiscal year and our academic year. And you'll see these are the top 10, and you'll see that the top two are actually older articles. The top two most read articles with 638 and 542 downloads a piece, and then there are two other articles in the top 10 that are from prior to 1954 or earlier. And I think that's really speaks to the value, of having this archive digitized because some of these are case reports. The hanging arm cast is super popular. And I think it may be because there's a dearth of literature and that this was just sort of hidden until we were able to digitize it. It was sort of tucked away on library shelves here and there. And now it is easy to discover, and it is being discovered. So that I think is really exciting, and we look forward to seeing how the archive is used as we move forward. But you can also see that our current articles are being downloaded as well. So six of the top 10 are since 2021, and we are relieved to see that. Actually, since 2023, so which is when we joined UTP. Okay, I see one question. Where is the journal indexed? David, I am going to come back to that towards the end because that is our biggest struggle moving into the current times now. And that is one of the things that makes us an underdog. And I will talk about that hopefully and answer your question. The answer to your question is we're not yet. And I will explain why as we get to the end, because it is a difficult process and rightly so. So we understand that, right? But I'll talk about why it's particularly challenging to start a new journal and get indexed when there are so many other journals around. So I will come to your question. Are there any other questions anybody has before I kind of move forward in time? All right. I wanted to give, because we are shifting gears, before I talk about the journal now, like post 2021, I wanted to talk about publication trends in general, because this is the C that I was talking about. So I borrowed this figure from Booth, Ross, and Detsky, the Changing Medical Publishing Industry Economics, Expansion, and Equity, which was published in 2023. This uses DOAJ data, which is the Directory of Open Access Journals, to show how many new open access journals are added per year. And you can kind of see, let's see, let me get to my note here. So based on the DOAJ data that they pulled, they say the number of open access journals, I'm quoting them now, increased from 22 in 2002. So you can see the little tiny, blue and yellow in 2002, to almost 17,000 in 2021. So that's the figure on the left. With more than 2,000 new open access journals launched every year. So that's kind of how open access has started to shift because you start to see this sort of growth in open access journals. Now, Medline is, it's crept, like the number of Medline journals has crept up just a little. So it's still, over 5,000. It's like 53, between 53 and 5,600 journals in Medline. But PubMed Central, which is the open access kind of piece, has another more than 3,000 journals that are in fully participating in PubMed Central or fully included, and then each issue gets deposited. And then you have other content, of course, in PubMed, the NCBI bookshelf, and the author deposits to meet funding mandates. But mostly the content is Medline and PubMed Central. index journals that make up the content. But you can see the increase in PubMed citations from 1931 to 2021. You can start to see how that curve gets steeper as we move from, basically 2002, which is when PubMed Central launched with two journals in it, to 2021. And you can really see in the last, 5 years that going steeper. So the number of PubMed citations per year, this is the number per year. So, you're adding, less than 200,000 a year, but by 2021, you're adding 1.8 million citations. So the PubMed's over 36 million citations. I didn't look up the most recent number, but we're into the substantially into the millions, and it goes up by, almost 2 million a year. So the C is very deep and it's very large. And as from the medical librarian standpoint, it's very difficult to keep a handle on and try to keep the good stuff in front of your docs and make sure they know how to find what they're looking for and how to sift through. We do a lot of literature search as a service, and trying to come up with workable criteria to sort of, we can't send them, 300 articles when 200 of them are not great. And so trying to work through, how to quickly and efficiently, figure out what they need in front of them, depending on the use case and the question and so on. But from the journal perspective, this is as the number of journals has gone up, the number of opportunities to publish have gone up, but also have the expectation. So even our residents and fellows expect to publish or are expected to publish, or even med students now are sort of feel like they have to have publications before they come out of medical school, especially if they want to go into an academic medical center when they come out. And so it's that the publish or perish starts, much earlier in the pipeline. And so you see, and then of course you just have some residents who are really into research, and that's, they have a lot of opportunity to publish now that wasn't necessarily around before. And now you have journals spinning off entire case report journals. So, still prestigious journal that all the attendings say, oh, submit it to this, submit your case report to this. It's like, oh no, that journal doesn't take case reports anymore. And now they have the blah, blah, blah journal of case reports, which is an open access journal. And that's going to cost you like $4,800 to publish your case report. And so, it's like the shifting market in that. So I wanted to show you what that looks like or how that translates. So look at these slides, and then here's how it translates into our small rural system. So this is just PubMed indexed articles only. So this actually doesn't count any of the stuff that was published in the Guthrie Journal before or now or anything. This is just PubMed indexed articles, and you can see that Guthrie affiliated authors published more in the last decade, because this is by decades from 86 to 25. We published more in the last decade than we did in the 3 previous decades combined. And so, we're seeing that even in our small system. And granted, our GME programs have expanded considerably since then, which means, more faculty, more residents, more fellows, more expectation to publish, and so on and so forth. But there's also more opportunity to publish and more pressure to do so. And then on the right, this is just it's a N of 1,069 publications from 1986 to 2025. And you can see the line, as you would expect, between Medline and PubMed index things doesn't start to deviate until around 2010. And then you start to see the Medline, as the number of publications creep up, our Medline publications creep up. But as the number of open access journals proliferates, you see a lot more journal articles being published in PMC journals rather than Medline journals. So how that broke down in 2025 was of 123 PubMed index publications, 46 were in Medline index journals, which would mean the rest, which I'm not going to math that right now, were in PMC journals, open access journals in the PMC. So getting to David's question, Uh, we aren't indexed, and the reason why is we've really only been publishing from the perspective of applying for indexing for 4 years, so 2021 to now, because the journal before was not peer reviewed, and so on and so forth. We have all the, we follow the ICMJE guidelines. We are, set up with UTP. We have all our metadata and all the technical stuff, the infrastructure in place. The one thing that kills us as a new journal and kills a lot of new journals, especially small journals, is because we're a small, I mean, Guthrie is small, we just are. Um, when Dr. Cagir went to set up the journal, he reached out to his colleagues at Guthrie and said, "Would you like to be on the editorial board? We're reviving the journal," you know? So it was a lot of the longtime folks who happened to be the senior, attendings a lot of times. Hey, do you want to be on the journal? So we have all of these folks who are also, senior attendings and faculty in our programs on our editorial board. Well, because of the way that medical publishing traditionally works, like oftentimes the first and second and third and fourth author will be like a mix of, med students and residents. And then the last author is often the senior author who is the supervisor of the whole thing, right? And he is often the senior attending, which overlaps a lot with our editorial board. So we have struggled. So even if when the first, second, third, and fourth authors are different, that last author is almost always someone on our editorial board. And so we're like, okay, like this is a problem. And we're ethical. We're not going to like encourage anyone to like artificially change authorship at all. Obviously, that would be a gross violation. So we're stuck with this, right, situation until we can reach that audience external to us and communicate that we are, in fact, open to submissions from anywhere and charge no money, right? So we changed our name from the Guthrie Journal because if you're outside the region, like the Guthrie name might not mean anything to you, right? To us, it's like, oh, it's Donald Guthrie, of course. But if you're not from Sayre or around Sayre, it may mean nothing to you. And we didn't have medicine in the journal or anything clinical or medical. And so we launched as the Guthrie Journal. And I'm like, hey guys, you know what? Like, I don't think anybody knows that we're a medical journal unless they already know, and we need to reach the people who don't know. And so we worked with UTP to rebrand and redesign the journal and call it the Guthrie Clinic Journal of Medicine so that it's clear that we are affiliated with the Guthrie Clinic and we are a journal of medicine. And so we're hoping that that will help us, flag us in the world, right, as a general medical journal with broad specialty representation on our editorial board. We've also built a multi-institutional, it's still mostly Guthrie, but we do have a multi-institutional editorial board. But then we have the same problem. They're like, oh, I have a paper I can submit, but it's like, okay, you're the senior author on said paper from X institution. So we're still struggling through some of that, but we've worked with UTP and they're like, you know what, this is totally common. I've read other posts from starting journals that are like, this is the hardest problem to get around because and again, it's with good reason. You have to be able to demonstrate that there's an interest in your journal beyond yourself if you want to get indexed. And we do. So, it's a longer timeline than we would like. And plus, once and this is these are the scientific and editorial requirements for PMC, but there are similar pieces in Scopus, in Web of Science, in DOAJ too that talk about this issue. That in DOAJ they talk about it as endogeny. In others, it's like you have to have an interest beyond yourself. Like there are different ways of phrasing it, but it's sort of the same problem. So that's one of the things that we are really focusing on this year to try to figure out, how do we finally break through? And honestly, I do think if we just remain persistent and try to stay visible. Um, yes, David, I think that's one of the things we don't want to have. We're trying to like expand at scale. We do have. Let's see. Sorry, I don't want to misspeak, so I'd have to look back at our board. But we do. Well, you can look on the page too, but yes, absolutely. That's one of the things we are hoping to do is to expand regionally first and sort of really hopefully become more of a destination for regional research that we can highlight and put on this global platform with UTP. And that, those are great ideas. And that's certainly something that we are also actively thinking of. I think it's do we have the connection and also do we have gaps in those specialty areas as well? And like we have terms for our editorial board that we're trying to like formalize and concretize because this is like our fourth year. And so trying to like roll some folks off and roll some folks on so we keep that specialty coverage. As well, and you know, with people who are actively publishing and so on, and that's about building connections and getting out there. So we're working on that and working with UTP to do that. But that really is our biggest challenge right now. But, and this is my but slide, we have achieved stability. We're good. We're putting out 2 issues a year, but we publish in advance of issues so people don't have to wait, you know, 6 months for their paper to come out. We publish, you know, continuously. We charge no money, which is becoming increasingly significant for good or ill. I think it's for ill, but, you know, we're proud to be able to offer, you know, a home. We're on a global platform with UTP. Our articles are being read. So our little tiny journal had more than 20,000 downloads last year. And so far, this is just the quarter 1 data, which for us is oh, FY26. Okay, so they did their calendar year. So this data came from UTP, but so that's January through March. So we had 7,000 downloads in those 3 months. So we're, you know, we're holding steady. Yeah, I totally agree, David. Believe me, these are the things that keep me up. Trust me. But our articles are being cited. That's the other thing that's happened in the last year. So we've started to notice citations, and we're trying to work on tracking those now that they're popping up. It's like, okay, we're starting like so. Even though we're not indexed, we are discoverable. And I think you know, reminding people like, well, what do you know? The point of being indexed is to be more discoverable. But if we're discoverable, we're discoverable. You know, so until we can get to indexing. And you know, we're taking a very conservative approach to that because if you don't, if you apply and you aren't accepted, you have to wait a certain period before you can reapply. And I think for PMC, I could be wrong because they vary a little bit, but I think PMC is 2 years. So you know, you don't want to mess up. You want to be sure when you go forward with your application that you are ready and that you're going to pass every hurdle. So that's kind of what we're working for now is to make sure we're good. So I just want to end and then I'll take any questions because we're almost out of time. Just to tell you what our journal is about now, because it is a little bit different, but we are really playing on what I think are our strengths, both because we are a journal focused on practicing clinicians and you know clinical practice, and but also on rural health disparities and outcomes, undergraduate and graduate medical education, and clinical practice. Like we want to make sure you know we want to put good information in the hands of our doctors, of our physicians, of our APPs, our advanced practice providers, of our nursing staff. Like we, you know, that's really what we're about. It's like how can we improve, you know, patient care and patient experience by putting good clinical information in people's hands? How can we improve medical education, you know, at the undergraduate and graduate levels, you know, and how can we improve rural health? So those are our strengths. We accept area articles from other areas, or we consider articles in other areas, but those are kind of like what we consider our core the core of our scope and the core of what we're good at and what we want to share the way the former journal did, but hopefully on a broader stage. And we do accept, in addition to original research, we accept QI, quality improvement, and case reports, which is dismal if you have no funding. I can tell you it's really tough to find a place to publish case reports that doesn't charge, and it's really hard to justify, I think, paying, you know, $3,000, $4,000 to publish a case report, unless it's really something rare. It's a tough one. And then of course we publish some editorial content and commentary, and I can't talk about it yet, but we're getting ready to start a new section. We have an editor for that section lined up. So we're thinking of new ways to kind of establish a readership as a journal. Like what makes you want to come to us as a journal, besides we have this collection of articles that you can find in a search. Like we're online only, but we're a journal that has a cohesive identity as well. So we're trying to kind of flesh that out. Um, yeah, and we're published by the foundation. But again, we're open to uh, oh, thank you. Um, Rural Nurse Organization. Yes, I have looked at this. Oh, and I will say, and this is great. Is this journal? Um, oh, at Decker School. So Guthrie just signed, we are working collaboratively with BU now and including some nurses from uh, the Decker School also. So cool. Hopefully we'll have more cross pollination too. And we do have a couple of, we have two DNPs on our editorial board as well, because we want to, promote interprofessional research and nursing-led research as well, in our journal. So we're trying to be in that way inclusive and interdisciplinary in our approach and in our focus. So, but thank you for sharing that. Does anybody have any other questions about any of this or comments or it was kind of a whirlwind, but I appreciated the opportunity to get to talk about the history of the journal and the digitization, and then some of the struggles that we have now, um, because the landscape is so crowded. Um, I will check out this journal again. I know I've looked at it before in another context, but I have it open now in my browser. So
Thank you, Mickey. Appreciate your presentation here and all the work that goes into establishing a journal. Oh, I see a question just popped in.
Open Journal Collective. Now that one I have not. Thank you, Madeline or Madeline, I'm not sure. Um, and David with DOAJ, it's the endogeny piece. You have to have, for the last two issues, you have to have, I think it's like 80% of your, I'm going to mess this up. There's a formula that they have that's on this precise issue, and you have to hit it two issues in a row. And we get close, and then we put out an issue with like that does it that falls back into the endogeny thing where we have too many repeat authors or authors on the editorial board or reviewers. DOAJ, I think, looks at reviewers too. So it's like, so there are no shortcuts when you're ethical, and we are committed to being fully, ethical and transparent. So we're just taking that slow and steady approach, and we will get there. But thank you. I'm going to check out this Open Journals Collective because that is not one I have explored. I've looked at like DOAJ and PMC and Web of Science and Scopus, and but that's it. But I'm excited to look at this. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you. That makes me feel less behind. I was like, how do I not know about this? I feel embarrassed, but okay. I'm a little behind. I wear other hats, so this makes me feel better. Thank you. We will definitely check it out.
Great. Okay. If there aren't any other questions, I guess we will end for today. Thank you very much, Mickey, for joining or for presenting today. And I thank everybody who attended. And as you leave, please complete the evaluation. And with that, I will stop the recording